Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're jumping straight into a really unusual and pretty significant legal story. It's out of Wisconsin.
Yeah, the federal indictment of Judge Dugan.
Exactly. And the core allegation is, well, it's that she obstructed an immigration arrest.
Right inside her own courthouse, which is,
Yeah.
it immediately grabs your attention.
It really does. It sits right at that intersection, doesn't it? State judicial power and federal immigration enforcement.
Mm-hmm. And it raises some really fundamental questions, about how these different parts of government are supposed to interact, or maybe how they shouldn't interact.
Absolutely. So to really get our heads around this, we've gathered quite a bit of material.
What are we looking at?
We've got official Department of Justice documents, things that outline how immigration courts actually function, their structure.
Okay.
And also the specific federal laws involved, the offenses related to immigration.
Right, the underlying charges.
Plus, of course, news reports detailing the timeline, the indictment itself, the legal back and forth.
And hopefully some legal analysis, too. Context is key here.
Yep. Got some expert legal analysis on things like judicial immunity, what obstruction of justice actually means in this kind of context.
Good, because our aim today, really, is to go beyond just the headlines. We need to understand the foundations here.
Right. What are the core issues?
We need to explore the immigration court system itself, its role, its powers.
Okay.
Then really dig into the charges against Judge Dugan. What specifically is she accused of doing?
And why is it illegal?
Exactly. And then zoom out a bit, consider the broader implications. What does this case mean for that relationship between federal immigration enforcement and state courts?
It feels like a big one. Okay, let's dive in. Where's the logical place to start? Maybe the immigration courts themselves.
Yeah, I think so. Let's talk about the Office of the Chief Immigration Judge, the OCIJ.
OCIJ. What is that exactly?
Think of it as the administrative center for all the immigration courts nationwide.
So it manages the whole system.
It oversees the operations, yes, and it handles the administrative supervision of all the immigration judges.
Okay, so these are the judges actually hearing the cases, making the rulings.
Precisely. But here's a crucial point. While they operate under this OCIJ administrative umbrella, the immigration judges themselves, they act independently when deciding cases.
Meaning OCIJ doesn't tell them how to rule.
No, not at all. They're bound by the law, the Immigration and Nationality Act, federal regulations, and precedent from the Board of Immigration Appeals and federal courts.
So their main job is just applying the law fairly.
Fairly and ideally in a timely manner. That's their core responsibility.
Okay. And where does this OCIJ fit in the grand scheme of the federal government?
Right. The OCIJ is part of something bigger called the Executive Office for Immigration Review, or EOR.
EOR. Okay.
And EOR also includes other key bodies like the Board of Immigration Appeals. That's the appellate body for immigration judge decisions.
Oh. Well.
And here's the key organizational point. The entire EOIR, including the OCIJ and the immigration judges, it falls under the Department of Justice.
Under the DOJ. Like the FBI.
Yes, ultimately under the authority of the Attorney General. It's part of the executive branch, but it handles the judicial function for immigration.
Okay, so the courts are DOJ. That's interesting. But what about IC? Immigration and Customs Enforcement. They're the ones doing arrests, right?
Yeah.
Where do they fit?
That is a really critical distinction. ICE is part of the Department of Homeland Security, DHS.
Completely separate cabinet department.
Completely separate. DHS was created back in 2003, and it took over most of the functions of the old Immigration and Naturalization Service, the INS.
Right under that.
So DHS, including ICE, is responsible for enforcing immigration laws. They also handle things like visas and naturalization benefits.
So enforcement is DHS, adjudication is DOJ.
You got it. They're separate entities. In fact, when a case goes before an immigration judge, DHS, usually represented by an ICE attorney, is one of the parties in the case. Like the prosecutor, in a way.
Okay. That division makes things much clearer. So let's shift to the laws themselves. Our sources mention Title 8 U.S. Code, Section 19224A, a lot. What's in that section?
Yes. Section 19224A is, well, it's a cornerstone of immigration enforcement law. It defines a whole range of federal offenses related to aliens, which is the term the law uses.
Okay, like what kind of offenses?
Several key things. It makes alien smuggling illegal. That's knowingly bringing someone into the U.S. somewhere other than an official port of entry.
So crossing the border illegally with someone.
Yes. It also prohibits transporting unauthorized aliens within the U.S.
Wait, even if they're already here?
Yes. If you know or are recklessly disregarding their unlawful status and the transportation is meant to help them stay here unlawfully.
Wow, okay, so giving someone a ride could potentially be an issue.
Potentially, yes, depending on the circumstances and intent. The law also forbids concealing or harboring unauthorized aliens. Again, with knowledge or reckless disregard.
Hiding someone, basically.
Mm-hmm. And then there's encouraging or inducing someone to come to, enter, or live in the U.S. unlawfully.
Encouraging them. How does that work?
For that one, the government has to prove you knew or recklessly disregarded the fact that their entry or continued presence would be illegal. It's quite broad.
It sounds incredibly broad. Actions that might seem minor could get caught up in this.
Exactly. And intent becomes absolutely crucial, which, brings us back to the complexities in a case like Judge Dugan's.
Right. Does it cover anything else?
Oh, yes. It also includes conspiring to do any of these things or aiding and abetting someone else.
Conspiracy, aiding and abetting, standard legal concepts.
Right. And there's also a separate prohibition on bringing or even attempting to bring an unauthorized alien into the U.S. in any way, and this part applies even if it's at a designated port of entry.
So like trying to sneak someone through customs?
Could fall under that, yes. Now, there's an important point about the mental state required, what you have to know.
Okay.
For the specific crime of alien smuggling, bringing someone across the border illicitly, the prosecution has to prove you actually knew the person wasn't a citizen or green card holder.
Actual knowledge.
Yes. But for most of the other violations in that section, transporting, harboring, encouraging, proving either actual knowledge or reckless disregard is enough.
Reckless disregard. That's a lower bar than actual knowledge, isn't it?
It generally is, yes. It means you were aware of a substantial risk that the person was undocumented and you ignored that risk.
And the penalties for violating 1324A.
They can be serious. Fines, imprisonment. The length of the sentence really varies depending on the specific act and the details.
Are there things that make the penalties worse?
Yes. Enhancements. If the crime was done for commercial gain, for profit, or if it results in serious bodily injury, or in the worst cases, someone's death, then the penalties can become much, much more severe. We're talking potential life sentences, or even, in very specific, rare circumstances, the death penalty.
Wow. Okay. That definitely sets the stage legally. So now let's turn to the specific events. Milwaukee County Courthouse, April 18th, 2025. What happened? Who was involved?
The central figure besides Judge Dugan was a man named Eduardo Flores-Ruiz.
Flores-Ruiz.
He was in state court that day facing charges, domestic abuse battery.
State charges.
Yes. But it also turned out he had a prior deportation from back in 2013.
Ah, so he had re-entered the country after being deported.
That was the allegation. And because of that prior deportation and his alleged unlawful re-entry, ICE obtained an administrative warrant for his arrest.
An administrative warrant, not a judicial one. We talked about that distinction.
Exactly. Issued by the agency itself based on probable cause of an immigration violation. And ICE knew he had a hearing scheduled that day.
Before Judge Dugan.
Before Judge Dugan. So a group of federal agents showed up.
Which agencies?
It was reportedly ICC, CBP Customs and Border Protection, the FBI, and even the DEA, the Drug Enforcement Administration.
DEA. Why were they involved?
That part's not entirely clear from the reports, but they were there. They were apparently in plain clothes.
Okay. And their plan?
The initial plan seems to have been to wait until his state court hearing was over, then arrest him. They spoke with courthouse security, a local police officer, and they apparently agreed to wait outside Judge Dugan's actual courtroom.
Trying to keep a low profile, maybe?
It seems like it, but things escalated. An attorney in the courthouse saw the agents, took photos of them, and then went and told Judge Dugan's clerk that federal agents were outside.
How did Judge Dugan react to that news?
According to the reports, very strongly. She was described as visibly angry.
Visibly angry. On the bench.
Well, she apparently referred to the situation as absurd, left the bench mid-proceeding, and went back into her chambers.
Wow. That is unusual.
Very unusual. That kind of reaction in a public setting really signals how charged this situation became very quickly.
So what happened when she encountered the agents? Did she confront them?
She did. Reports say she came out into the hallway accompanied by another judge.
Okay.
And she confronted the agents. She was reportedly quite upset, told the agent in charge they needed to leave the courthouse immediately.
Demanded they leave.
Yes, and she demanded to see a judicial warrant for Flores-Ruiz's arrest.
Ah, back to the warrant issue.
Exactly. The ICE agent explained he had a valid administrative warrant from his agency, but Judge Dugan reportedly insisted that wasn't good enough for an arrest inside her courthouse.
So direct disagreement over the type of warrant needed.
Right. She then told the agents to go report to the chief judge's office. And the other judge who was with her actually walked most of the agents down the hall towards that office.
Okay, so most of the agents were heading off to see the chief judge. What about Flores-Ruiz's case back in Judge Dugan's courtroom?
This is where it gets really critical for the charges against her. While the chief judge, who wasn't actually in the building but was talking to the ICE agent on the phone, was dealing with that, Judge Dugan's courtroom deputy apparently told some of the remaining DEA agents outside the courtroom that Judge Dugan was, quote, pushing Flores-Ruiz's case.
Pushing it, meaning trying to finish it quickly?
That was the clear implication, yes.
Yeah.
Trying to expedite his hearing. And then comes the key allegation.
Okay.
It's alleged that Judge Dugan personally escorted Flores-Ruiz and his defense lawyer out of the courtroom, but not through the public doors.
Where did they go?
Through a non-public jury door.
A jury door. A private exit. That sounds deliberate.
It certainly raises immediate questions, yes. That alleged action is really central to the federal charges.
So, did Flores-Ruiz get away then?
Well, not permanently. He and his lawyer did eventually emerge from that non-public area back into a public hallway inside the courthouse.
And the agent saw them?
The agent spotted them, yes. And a foot chase started.
A chase? Inside the courthouse?
Through the courthouse, yes. But ultimately, the federal agents caught up to him and arrested him.
Okay, so Flores-Ruiz was arrested. But the story didn't end there, obviously. Federal authorities then turned their attention to Judge Dugan.
That's right. Just a week later, April 25th, she was arrested based on a federal criminal complaint.
And what are the specific federal charges she's facing now?
2 main charges. First, concealing a person from arrest. That's a violation of Title 18 U.S. Code, Section 1071.
Okay, concealing from arrest. And the second?
Obstruction of justice. The indictment mentions 2 possible statutes here. 18 U.S.C. Section 1505, which is about obstructing federal agency proceedings.
Like ICE proceedings.
Potentially. Or Section 1503, which is a broader statute about obstructing the due administration of justice.
So concealing and obstructing. And a federal grand jury agreed there was enough evidence to indict her.
Yes. They reviewed the evidence and returned a formal indictment on those charges.
How have Judge Dugan and her lawyers responded? I imagine they're fighting this vigorously.
Oh, absolutely. Her legal team came out very strong, arguing she's protected by absolute judicial immunity.
Judicial immunity. We touched on that. What's their argument exactly?
Their core argument is that everything she did that day, all her actions, were taken in her official capacity as a state judge presiding over her court.
So because she was acting as a judge, she can't be prosecuted?
That's the claim. They filed a formal motion to dismiss the entire indictment based on this immunity. They argue it's an absolute bar to even having the prosecution go forward.
Not just a defense at trial, but a reason the case shouldn't happen at all.
Exactly. They're also raising arguments about federalism, the 10th Amendment, the balance of power between federal and state governments.
Questioning if the feds can even prosecute a state judge for actions in her courtroom.
That's part of it, yes. Judge Dugan herself has pleaded not guilty to all charges.
And what's the status now? Is there a trial date?
There is. As it stands, the federal trial is scheduled for late July.
And what about her job as a judge in Wisconsin?
The Wisconsin Supreme Court stepped in and temporarily suspended her from her judicial duties.
Suspended? Why?
They cited the need to protect public confidence in the courts while these serious federal charges are pending against her.
Okay. Let's unpack that judicial immunity argument a bit more. It seems central. Can you explain what it really means here?
Sure. Judicial immunity is a very old legal principle. It's designed to protect judges from being sued or prosecuted for actions they take as part of their judicial job.
Why is that protection needed?
The main idea is to let judges make decisions based only on the law and the facts, without being afraid someone will come after them personally if they don't like the ruling. It's about ensuring impartiality.
Okay, so it protects their decisions.
Right. And Judge Dugan's team is arguing this immunity is absolute here, that it completely blocks this federal prosecution. They're saying everything she did in her courtroom falls under that official judicial function.
But the counter-argument must be that what she allegedly did wasn't really part of her judicial function, right?
Exactly. That's the crux of the legal fight. The prosecution will argue that things like, allegedly telling federal agents to leave based on the wrong warrant type, or especially escorting someone out a non-public door, that those actions go beyond just presiding over a state domestic violence case. They'd say that's interfering with federal law enforcement, not judging a case.
So it comes down to defining the scope of her judicial function.
Precisely. And those federalism arguments tie in, too. How much can the federal government police the actions of a state judge in her own courtroom? It's a real clash of powers.
Okay, let's dig into the actual charges. Obstruction of justice first. You mentioned two possible statutes, 1505 and 1503. What does the prosecution need to prove?
The really key element for either obstruction charge is proving she acted corruptly.
Corruptly. What does that mean legally? Does it mean she took a bribe or something?
Not necessarily, no. Under 1505, the one about obstructing agency proceedings corruptly usually means acting with an improper purpose.
Improper purpose, like what?
Like acting to hinder the agency's work for reasons outside her legitimate duties, even if she didn't personally gain. Under 1503, the broader one about obstructing the administration of justice, it generally means acting with the specific purpose of wrongfully impeding justice.
So it's all about her intent, her state of mind.
Very much so. They have to show it wasn't just a mistake or a good faith belief about her authority, but a deliberate, improper, or wrongful goal.
So her beliefs about the warrants, about IC's authority in her court, that's relevant.
Highly relevant to determining her intent. And there's another legal wrinkle. Does an ICE arrest attempt even count as a pending proceeding under 1505, or fall under the due administration of justice in 1503?
Could that be debated?
It might be. Courts have sometimes found agency investigations are proceedings, but applying it to an arrest scenario like this could be argued by the defense.
Okay, and the other charge, concealing a person from arrest, Section 171. What are the elements there?
For that one, they need to prove a few things. First, that Judge Dugan knew there was a federal warrant for Flores-Ruiz's arrest.
Which seems likely, given the confrontation.
It does seem she was aware of a federal warrant, even if she disputed its type. Second, they have to prove she actually harbored or concealed him.
And the alleged use of the non-public jury door would be the key evidence there.
That's almost certainly what the prosecution will focus on for that element, yes. And third, critically, they need to prove her intent in doing that was specifically to prevent his discovery and arrest by those federal agents.
Again, intent is key. It keeps coming back to what she was thinking and why she did it.
Absolutely. Her motivation is central to both charges.
This whole thing just screams ethical questions too, doesn't it? I mean, a judge is supposed to uphold the law.
Right. The core expectation is that judges facilitate the legal process, not impede it. So the allegation that she might have actively helped someone evade federal officers acting under a warrant, it raises profound ethical concerns about her role. But, there are ethical questions raised on the other side, too. Some observers look at how quickly this happened, the incident, the arrest a week later, the very public nature of it. And they question if the prosecution itself might be an overreach. Is it potentially an attempt to intimidate state judges who might object to federal immigration tactics in their courthouses?
So, concerns about prosecutorial power and chilling judicial independence.
Those concerns have definitely been raised in the legal commentary around this case.
And all of this is happening against a bigger backdrop, right? This issue of IC making arrests in state courthouses.
It's been controversial for a while.
Oh, absolutely. For a long time, there was sort of an unwritten rule, or at least a general practice, that IC would mostly stay out of courthouses for routine enforcement.
But that changed.
It shifted significantly in 2017 under the first Trump administration. They issued policies that led to a big increase in IC arrests happening in and around state courts.
And that caused friction. A lot of friction. Then the Biden administration put some limits back in place. But then, in 2021, the Trump administration issued a new directive that removed most of those restrictions again.
So the policy allowing more courthouse enforcement was back in effect when this Dugan incident happened in 2025.
That's correct. The more permissive policy was the one operating at that time.
So Judge Dugan's situation wasn't necessarily unique in terms of why ICE was there.
The presence of ICE in a courthouse to make an arrest wasn't unique by 2025, no. But the alleged actions of the judge certainly were, and this whole policy shift has been hugely controversial.
Why? What are the main objections?
Many state and local judges, prosecutors too, have been really vocal. They argue it creates a collision course with state courts.
How so?
Their biggest worry is that it makes communities less safe because people, especially immigrants, become afraid to come to court.
Victims.
Witnesses. Exactly. If you're a victim of domestic violence or you witnessed a crime, but you're undocumented or have family who are, you might be terrified to go to the courthouse if you think ICE could arrest you or someone you know there.
So cases could fall apart. People won't cooperate.
That's the concern. There have been reports of exactly that happening, cases being dropped because victims or key witnesses were too scared to show up. It undermines the whole state justice system, they argue.
So you could see Judge Dugan's case as maybe an extreme flashpoint in this ongoing tension.
That's a very good way to put it. It's like an escalation of that conflict between federal immigration goals and state court operations. Some might see the prosecution as the federal government drawing a hard line, saying don't interfere.
Has anything like this happened before? A judge being charged for something similar?
There was a somewhat similar case, yeah. In Massachusetts, during the first Trump administration, a state judge was indicted, accused of helping someone slip out a back door to avoid ICE.
And what happened in that case?
As our sources note, that case was actually dismissed by a federal judge.
Dismissed. Interesting parallel. So as we wrap this up, what are the big takeaways, the key complexities we're left with?
Well, it's clear there are just layers here. You've got these really significant legal arguments about judicial immunity. Does it apply? How far does it go?
Right. That's fundamental.
Then you have the specific facts of the obstruction and concealment charges. What exactly happened in that hallway behind that jury door? And crucially, what was Judge Dugan's intent? That's going to be fiercely contested.
Factual disputes on top of the legal ones.
Absolutely. And all of this is playing out against that very contentious backdrop of federal policy on courthouse immigration enforcement. It's impossible to separate the case from that context.
And it really forces you to think about some basic principles of how our government is set up, doesn't it?
It really does. It hits right at fundamental questions about the balance of power, federal versus state, the independence of the judiciary, state and federal. Where are the lines drawn?
Where should they be drawn?
That's the debate, isn't it? Between a judge's duty in their courtroom and federal law enforcement's authority to execute warrants. It's a tough one.
So thinking about all these different angles, is this prosecution upholding the rule of law, making sure no one is above it? Or is it federal overreach that could damage state courts? It leaves you with a lot to think about.
It really does.
What does this case ultimately say about the role and maybe the limits of a judge when federal agents show up at their door? And looking forward, what are the potential long-term ripple effects for how state courts function and for the trust community's place in them?
Those are exactly the questions we need to keep asking as this unfolds.
Definitely a lot to consider there. And that seems like a fitting place to end our deep dive for today.